69 boy 6969. Number 1, I love your name. Number 2, welcome to the chat. What's up, everyone? It's Betty Dots here once again. It's been a while, but hey, a new Strive character is out. Good old Happy Chaos over here. And he's got a new theme, you know, and that's his tradition in the Video Game Music Theories channel. We will listen to that theme. We're going to try to analyze it, try to see if we can get any good musical insight from what Daisuke's vision has come up with for this blue lad over here. It should be a lot of fun. Now, hey, we're a growing channel, right? We're kind of tiny, but we're growing little by little. So if you like it, go ahead and subscribe, maybe put the bell on, I guess. I would love to have you in the channel, keep this going. And hey, we do these live on the stream. So if you ever want to be here for the analysis, you can go ahead and follow the Twitch down in this description that's right below. Okay, let's get started. So Happy Chaos, what's the deal with this guy? I'm not really sure. I haven't watched the whole story of Guilty Gear Strive, but the part that I did see was Eno went up to a person and took Happy Chaos out of that person. Happy Chaos can make a car out of nowhere. He's also super powerful for some reason, attached to Batman for some reason. I don't really know. I know y'all love to tell me how the song is related to lore in the comments, so go ahead and let me know if I miss anything. As a fighting game character, he's crazy, right? Happy Chaos is really crazy character, really hard to play in my opinion, right? Really hard on the hand because you have to you have a button that's only the gun and you have to roll into gun and do all that. Point is, I tried labbing him for 15-20 minutes and my hand was hurting so much that I don't think I can play him, but I'm gonna keep trying him out because he's super fun and I love seeing such an interesting character in this new Guilty Gear game, because I mean that's kind of the Guilty Gear way, is making this completely whacked out character as just doing stuff that you've never seen a fighting game character do. But anyway, we're gonna listen to a song together. I've got my trusty keyboard over here. I've got my notepad over here so we can write down any findings that we find. So let's go ahead and listen to, they got the Lo-Fi Girl with the Christmas stuff. Let's go ahead and listen to the Happy Chaos theme. Drift is the name of the song. Daisuke Shiwatari. Let's give it a listen. Beautiful piano. Super swingy. You got the hats in the back too.
It took me 10 years to find the answer something. I forgot about it in 2 seconds.
Oh, he says 2 seconds. That's funny. All right, so that's kind of funny. It's kind of like an existential sort of deal. It took him years to find the answer to something that you forgot. All right, it's in D minor. So I really like this, right? This almost has a Deftones, very gravitating, very floaty, big metal situation. Very modal. We'll talk about that in a little bit. That's beautiful. Yeah, Alice in Chains, very 90s, right? I related mostly to Deftones, but yeah. A lot of people talk about the swing part. They talk about the super heavy, sort of more genty parts. I love this. This is so sweet. There's a gent, right? That sounds straight up Periphery. Big rhythmic shift right there. 200 ice on me, 600 on me. You got the double vocals with the growly. I really like this chorus because it's very confusing. It feels like it's gonna be normal, but it does you see the bars repeat. I feel like there's maybe a mixage of time signatures there. Probably listen to that more closely. You got the metal version of that swingy intro. You know, I usually don't like that abrupt of a transition, but for this, it works, right? we go back. Oh my god. The tone of this piano, I'm like in love with it. I really like the way the piano sounds, the way how the theme performs. This is such a good riff. Oh, so I'm doing the fifth and then the octave. Okay, so I think I figured out what mode the verses are in. Here's your kind of genty situation, right? And then it goes into more standard metal, but it's got it's actually very modern metal, right? Doing like vocals and then kind of breakdown riffs, vocals, breakdown riffs. I love that auto-tune vocal in the back. It's kind of cheesy, but like cheesy in just the right way. I drift tonight a finite one and the infinite one. That makes me think of the intro of Steins Gate, right? Where he's like, Mugen.
Can you hear it? The pulses of the living.
We know for a fact that Daisuke loves doing this, right? Doing the big cinematic outro. Sato theme has it, right? Faust theme has it. So I think like a very fast 6/8. It's like a very like kind of victorious 6/8. It's almost mocky. It's almost like it's making fun of Daisuke. And a big vocal arrangement of the chorus. Obviously not the same melody as the chorus, but the same lyrics, so it's definitely referential.
Please don't stop the flow. I drift tonight with wandering dreams.
Great return, right? Again, I love that it's like not really like working so hard to transition. It's just like very disjointed. Yeah, Les Mis is a good way of putting it, right? It definitely has a very like victorious musical sound. Oh, great outro. That's great. Let me hear that outro one more time. Yeah, that's so good. It's like I'm getting the heck out of Dodge. All right, so that's really good. That's a really good theme. I guess we could like talk about like different sections in this song, right? Like one thing that I want to say, when I talked about the Gold Lewis theme, it was easy for me to talk about what makes the Gold Lewis theme sound like an American song. And when I talked about Jaco's theme, it's very easy for me to talk about like what makes Jaco theme sound like an anime song. With Happy Chaos, I think that because of the nature of his character, which is like some sort of like weird time demon that like we don't really know what's going on with him, kind of has like a little bit of a omnipotent sort of like presence. There's a much more original, less derivative composition, and it's still derivative because Daisuke loves his influences, right? You got the swing intro, you got the very like Deftones, very modal verses, you got the like sort of like more genty, more modern metal, like sort of like pre-choruses, right? You got the chorus that just has this beautiful melodic melody, the weird auto tune, which also is referential to like kind of like modern new metal, maybe a little bit, right? And then it has a little bit of that, of those rhythmic shifts that have been characteristic in the whole song. And then you got an outro that is very much like a musical, like a Les Mis sort of situation, like they were saying in the chat. There's a lot of different things here, right? And I guess the question is do they work together? And I think they do. I think one good way of putting it would be like, this is almost like what Axel's theme should have been, right? I think that because all the parts in the song are so starkly different from each other, they work really well together, right? Because it just shifts on you. I mean, one thing that like the Happy Chaos theme Drift has going for it is that every single part is so strong. The chorus is good. The chorus is maybe my least favorite part, but it works. It works where it is, and it's short enough. So I want to like kind of go over every part. So I want to work on that first sort of intro, and let's just listen to that and see what's going on. Let's see if it's also in D, right? Because most of the song is in D. This is so funny, right? Because if you see, I have a new theme song for the videos, right? It's actually very similar to that chord progression because it's a very common jazz chord progression that I use like kind of as a reference, right? So what's going on there is that they're doing a 2-5-1 in C major, right? And the 2-5-1 is like one of the most common chord progressions in jazz, right? It makes a lot of sense that he went for this, right? Because the song is not a jazz song, but he's like kind of doing like, hey, this is gonna be the jazz section of the song, and it's really short. So how do you like really send the message that this is a jazz section? In jazz, it is very, very common to do, like, I'm talking extremely common. I'm talking every single jazz song has at least a million of these. We're talking about the 2 minor, let's call it 2 minor 7, 5 dominant to 1 major. There's another chord, but I'll tell you what that chord is in just a second. The way that that chord progression looks like is in C major, which is what we're at right now, is D minor, because D minor is the second chord of C major, into G dominant, which is a 5 chord, and then we go to the 1. So you got a 2-5-1 in C major. The thing about the 2-5-1 is that like it's one of the most important things in the language of jazz. This is what it sounds like. I'm going to play it again so we can hear it a little bit better. Right, so that's a 2-5-1. Now you might notice listening to this chord progression that it feels very pleasant. It feels like it makes sense and like it's doing everything right. And one thing that we talked about in past videos, especially in the Jacko video, is that like movement down in fifths and the circle of fifths is something that's like very, very sought after in like music. We are kind of like hardwired to expect from music. So when movement going down in fifths happens, that's very pleasant to like human beings, right? So say for example, if you think C and G, right around here, you got your C and you got your G. C would be the 1 if G was the 5, right? If C is 1, then C, D, E, F, G. G would be that 5, right? So going from G to C means you're going down a fifth. And the same situation happens from G to D. The D minor is dropping down a fifth to G, and the G dominant is dropping down a fifth to C major, creating this perfect circular motion that's very desirable. That's the reason why 2-5-1s are so common in jazz, is because they're kind of like the perfect version of a chord progression, right? Think about like the Mewtwo of a chord progression. It doesn't make it better or worse, it just makes it very pleasant to like the human ears. But it doesn't stay on the 1, right? Because then that would be too stable and it would kind of kill the momentum. It actually goes to the 4 at the end. And lo and behold, when you go to F major after going to C major, all you're doing is going down another fifth to kind of continue that circular motion, but not ended in the stable chord. So that's most of what I have to say about the first section, is that it's using a 2-5-1 simply to say like, hey, welcome to jazz. This is jazz, baby, jazz hands, right? And it does it really well. One thing that you might notice is that the way that they transition to a new situation, right? The way that they say, hey, the focus is not on C anymore. When we're going to the verse where the focus is on D now, and we should really pay attention to this D because we are changing keys, it's that the bass starts playing that riff, right? Like, listen to this. While the slides are happening, and then we drop that riff. The next section completely changes keys. We go into the verse. Understand that we're not in D minor anymore. Really, D Dorian is what it was in the intro because it's C major. We're not in that anymore. We're not even in a minor key anymore. We've actually moved on to a dominant key, which a dominant key shares those notes, the D, C, D, and the D, 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 with the minor chord, but instead of having an F natural, it has an F sharp. So I'll play a D dominant chord so you can hear that. This would be what happens in the verse. This is the key that the verse is in. The intro has more of this sort of D chord, right? A minor chord with this F right here. Something has shifted and we've entered the modal realm. The major scale has 7 modes. I'm not going to go deep into what they are, but they're essentially scales inside of the major scale, right? And what we're in here right now is that we're in D mixolydian. Once the melody starts kicking in, this F sharp starts to get introduced. And if I have D in the bass, I have an F sharp, which is the major third, and I have a flat 7, which is this C right here, then that's enough for me to know that I'm in D mixo. The thing about this is that I don't even need to write the chord progression because the whole situation, the whole time, is in D 7. This just kind of like keeps going the whole time. What I mean by modal music, instead of relying on a lot of chord changes the way that this did to be interesting, it just kind of chills on one chord. Why does it chill on one chord? Well, if you only chill on one chord, especially if it's a different chord than like your 1 chord, you know, in the key of G major, this would actually be the 5 chord, right? If you're chilling on there and you're playing a certain scale on top of it, your brain has more time to listen to what the mode actually sounds like, right? Which this is what the D dominant mode sounds like. I'm just going to play a D dominant chord and play G major on top of it. Kind of has a little bit of an attitude, right? It's almost like the major scale, but it has that flat 7 that makes it sound a little bit grittier and a little bit like tougher. By the way, a dominant mode is neither major nor minor. It actually has to do a little bit with the Gold Lewis video, so if you haven't seen the Gold Lewis video, I would recommend that you check it out. Since we have that D dominant going the whole time, then our brain has time to listen to the sound of that mode. It has time to listen to that melody against the D dominant chord without the chord changes changing what the melody sounds like. That's a concept that was invented by Miles Davis, the concept of like modal jazz, which is not exactly what's happening here. It's not jazz, right? But the concept of like keeping a chord going for a very long time to hear a mode on top of it is for sure a Miles Davis concept that, like y'all were saying, and like I said before, got transferred to 90s music. The Deftones, they had a very big intention of like actually making like kind of modal, very heavy music, and they would just like make their verses be on like one chord the whole time, and so the melodies would sound like haunting and like static and strange, and they would sound like they're from another world, because as humans we're only used to listening to major scale melodies and minor scale melodies that work within major scale chord progressions and minor scale chord progressions. The fact that like Miles Davis came up with modal jazz in like, I want to say 1958 or something like that, means that we've only really been listening to modal stuff for like half a century, which isn't that much time for like humanity as a whole to like get used to those sounds. So they're always very haunting, very like stimulating sounds. And I think that's what makes this verse be so special. It's like a concept that I could probably develop on further. If you want me to develop on it further, it is like kind of like the pinnacle of like learning harmony and stuff, learning harmony and melody and like how those interactions work. Go ahead and drop a comment if there's anything that you don't understand. I do reply to my comments, so I'll try to like help you out as much as I can. I know this part got a little bit complicated. All right, so as the verse is really cool. I want to like keep listening and see what happens later. I don't want to worry too much about like those little like transition chords that they have in the middle of the verse. So that's those transition chords, and then it just brings us back to that D. D dominant, D dominant. Different transition chords here. You might notice for this very genty. I don't know if like any of y'all have ever been in like the periphery and like stuff like that, right? But this is very gent, like that's sort of like guitar playing that's very disjointed rhythmically and so fast that it's like hard to like keep up, right? But you can kind of see it like that sound is like definitely like prevalent here. But the shift, we've shifted out of the D mixolydian sort of situation. And I mean, case in point, the rhythm gets more disjointed, stuff gets like kind of like more like but it feels a little bit more normal. It feels like we've gone to like back to the normal world, right? Whereas like in the verse, we were like kind of like suspended in the ether, right? But let's listen to what that pre-chorus sounds like. You know, I'm tripping. I was wrong. This doesn't go back to D minor. So it's writing modally, but it's not doing the thing where you like, where you stay on one chord like you did in the verse. But it does switch to another mode of D. So this is kind of interesting. Let me try to like flesh out an idea that I have in my brain. The intro is in C major, but C major is the same as D Dorian. So it has one mode of D covered. The verse is definitely, because it's only relying on one chord, in D mixolydian, right? So that's two modes of D. And now, because in the verse, you see how it goes, that note that they're playing there is this E flat. See, we get a little bit of that Metroid sound, right? That flat 2 is the characteristic pitch of yet another mode of D, which is the mode of D Phrygian, the third mode. You can hear it if I play a D minor chord and I play the notes of B flat major on top of it. Despite the fact that they're relying on the D Phrygian mode, they're not writing modally, because writing modally is when you write over one chord for a very long time. That chord is going for a lot of bars in order for you to be able to hear the sound of that mode, right? Here, they are using the chords of the D Phrygian scale in order to get a little bit of a different chord progression, right? But it's still tonal writing because it's using a chord progression. If that flies over your head, don't worry about it, or shoot a question in the comments, right? It's a little bit of a more complicated concept. We're getting into like some like really thick college level stuff at this point, right? But they have the D minor, and then they have that E flat major chord, right? Which is the flat 2 chord in the key of D Phrygian. And it's relying on 2 chords. On D minor, that's what happens in 200 Eyes of Me. And then it goes into E flat major, which would be that flat 2 again. Flat 2 and then 1. Right? It's crunchy, it's ugly, but it does have a little bit of a cool attitude. But I mean, if you play the 1 and the flat 2 at the same time, it's a very nasty sound, right? So it's a difficult mode to work with, but it's one that's like very cool and very jarring if you want to make something that's like dramatic and like just kind of tense sounding. There's a chorus. So a lot of people ask me when I'm teaching music, like, how do you figure out the key of a song so quickly? And a lot of times I'm looking for the 1 chord, right? I'm looking for which chord feels like your home resolution chord. But with a part like this chorus right here, the first thing I do is like look at that very complex melody. It has a lot of different notes and try to figure out what those notes are, because that's definitely going to point me towards the scale, right? So let me do that really quick and we'll see what key this is in. Oh, okay. All right, so this is very interesting because the chorus feels melodic and it feels very pretty because it seems to be just in D major, right? It seems like we just transitioned to like the first mode of the D, right, which is D major, but that's 4 different modes of D that this freak is using in the song, right? So like that's very, very cool, the way that that's put together. That chord progression seems like a pretty simple one that is also exalted by the fact that the rhythm is so disjointed, right? So what's going on with that rhythm? Let's see. So strange, right? Because it starts in 4, but then it like shifts very sneakily into another time signature. Oh, it's going to 5, I think. Okay, it sounds to me, oh wow, that is thick, right? So I'm going to try to like write this in the clearest way possible, right? But to me, it sounds like the chorus, it seems like we're doing a bar of 4 and a bar of 5. And then I think we're doing another bar of 4 and another bar of 5, which is already really weird. Oh, let me try it again. I think I got it. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, oh my god. Okay, so it's doing a bar of 4 and then a bar of 5 and then a bar of 4 and then a bar of 5 and then a bar of 6, which is a very weird disjointed pattern. I feel like that would be the best way to organize it for the time signatures to line up with the phrases. I'm going to play that chorus one more time and count those out so we can hear that better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's it. Let's go. All right, dude, I got it. I didn't think it was going to take me that little. All right, so a bar of 4, a bar of 5, a bar of 4, a bar of 5, and a bar of 6, right? Which is kind of like a really cool rhythmic contrast, right? Because you shift to D major, which is like the normal place to be at, right? Like if I'm like, that's like a very campy sort of like sound. And so how do we make that sound a little bit more interesting, a little bit more chaotic, I guess, like happy chaos? Well, let's just grab the rhythm and completely mess it up. And despite the fact that both halves of the chorus are so different from each other, they're also following that same rhythmic pattern. So that's awesome. I want to like keep listening.
And you hear it.
And then we go to 968. The auto tune is so good. All right, so this section is very cool. So it's the only section that doesn't change modes again, right? It's staying on that D major sort of situation, right? Can you hear it? Da-ba-da-da-da-da. And then it does a whole chord progression that I don't feel like we should figure out because it's just regular tonal D major. But what I wanted to talk about was the rhythm, right? Because this is a section that you can very easily count to 4 with, right? I said before it was 6/8. I don't think that's right. I'm gonna take that back. But you can very easily count to 4, but there's a discrepancy with 4s. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's like really swingy, but like the way that it's like put together, it doesn't feel like a swing, right? It almost feels like a 12/8 sort of situation, but they both come from the same thing, right? Like in the end, all that swing is grabbing the 2 eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and making the numbers longer and the ends shorter, right? So like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and a lot of people ask themselves like, okay, well, where does that shorter eighth note come from? That doesn't make any sense. How could you do that? So a lot of people think about it as like triplets, but taking out the middle triplet, right? So if you're thinking triplet, 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 only doing tritlet, 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 and you end up with that sort of feel. If someone were to tell me this is in 4/4, but swung, I would say, sure. And if someone was going to tell me, hey, this is in 12/8, because 12/8 is the triple version, aka the version in which we split things in 3, like kind of like triplets to get that kind of swung feel. This is in 12/8. It's a triple version of 4. Yeah, it's all in D major. They do have some borrowed chords in there, but I don't think it's anything particularly important. Oh, so that's kind of cute. And the outro, that very last chord, they go back to that Mixolydian sound in the verse just for a sec. The way that the end of the song is by going to the flat 7. Boom, 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 which you could argue comes from D minor, but I'm going to say it comes from D mixo right now simply because D mixo was used before, right? So that's like kind of what I'm thinking there, right? Yeah. Flat 7 to 1. And then you just do the little beginning of like that riff again, and then they end it. That's awesome. So I think the song is like very cool. I think this is one of the best songs on the Guilty Gear soundtrack so far at this point. I think it's so interesting. I think it's so good for fighting. It feels so good when you're fighting because it goes to so many different places. And I think that like the cool thing that's bridging all these things together is revolving, like having all these revolving modes around D, right? So like you got an intro that is in C major, but C major could be considered the same as D Dorian. And even though D is not the center of attention here, it is the first chord in the chord progression, right? So there is something that we're pointing out too, that we're at least starting the song with a D, even though it's not technically a D key. The verse is very clearly in D Mixolydian, working with the natural 3, the major third on the melody, but also having that flat 7 in the riff. And that's awesome. The pre-chorus is mostly around D Phrygian, right? Revolving mostly around a D minor chord. But then going to that E flat to ba-da-ba-da-ba-da, boom, right? To do those little hits, and that gives it that Phrygian sound, reminiscent of Metroid maybe, but it's a lot faster, so it doesn't necessarily feel like Metroid, right? And then finally the chorus, the chord progression is just in D major, but then you have this very disjointed rhythm situation where you have a bar of 4/4, a bar of 5/4, a bar of 4/4, a bar of 5/4, and then a bar of 6/4 to like really bring that home, right? To like make it feel very disjointed, despite the fact that we went to like the place that should feel nice. You see, no one disagrees with how like pretty and normal and campy D major sounds like. But you put it in this context of very disjointed rhythm and you end up with something a little bit more interesting. And the final section that like sort of like, can you feel it? Is a sort of swung 4/4 or a 12/8, however you want to hear it or however you want to think about it. I think both of them work for the explanation. They're both referential to swing, right? And to triplet swings. And it's just all in D major as well. It makes sense because they do go back to the lyrics of the chorus using the same key as the chorus. There is a connection there. And then finally, very tiny detail in the final chorus, they do go to the flat 7 before ending the song when they're talking about the finite and the infinite. So very interesting song, all revolving around D, the will of D. There's any One Piece fans out there? Yeah, I'm feeling pretty happy about this. I really like what Daisuke did here. I think it's a really good song, and I want to listen to it one more time with all of the stuff that we found, and then wrap it up. All right, so again, Daisuke, Drift, Happy Chaos theme. Yeah, thank you for the music, man. Again. beautiful swing intro. I think that piano performance is so good.
About it in 2 seconds.
I like the weird accents that he does in 2 seconds. The way that he says certain words to make them rhyme is so funny to me. So again, D mixolydian, very modal. You can feel that it's modal because of how static it makes you feel, right? When there's no chord changes, you're kind of like suspended in the air until those little chords hit. Chord changes take you out of it for a second. It's kind of like a lift off, like a... Now we're in the pre-chord. So we've switched to D minor right here. Really D frigid. And it goes to that E flat, which that's the flat 2 of frigid. It's what like shows me that we're in D frigid. Alright, we're in D major now with our very strange sort of rhythm. 4, 5, 6, 1. It feels like it's not gonna work, and then it works. That's what's so cool about it. Alright, so now we flip. Right, we're flipping. Heavy part during the vocals, quiet part during the breakdown. Here comes the piano. This is cool. This is a cool way of breaking it down here. Good way of like cleaning up the palette a little bit too, because it is kind of an overwhelming song. The only real development that happens in verse 2 is that they're adding more voices, but I think that's enough. That makes it feel even more floaty and strange. Oh, they also don't do those chord changes, I don't think. Oh no, they do them right here. Okay, never mind. Oh, and they just go straight into it, so they don't do the middle ones. That's kind of interesting. D major for our chorus with our really weird joint. That would be a good rhythmic exercise for y'all to try to practice. Try to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Being able to like count it like that would give you a good understanding of like odd time signatures and how we can combine them with regular time signatures. Ironic rhythm is a grand orchestra. That's what I mean about the accent. Okay, that's kind of funny. I just want to point it out. He goes, it's never the same tone. So like when he says same tone, he doesn't sing the same tone. It's never the same tone. Which is kind of funny, like when you sing what you're playing. When you say what, you know what I mean? It's like kind of like Hallelujah, where it's like the 5th, the 6th, or right? They're like saying the chords that they're like singing. That's kind of, it's cute. Kind of cheesy, but you know, we know that Daisuke is kind of cheesy and we love it. I'm not trying to say that Daisuke sings the song. I know that Daisuke doesn't sing the song. Y'all like told me a million times in the tier list video. I understand that. Those auto-tune voices are so funny. I think it's very important that he goes back to the final chorus, just like boom, like hey, here it is, instead of doing a whole. Amazing song. I think that they're really good. I think it's time that I talk about kind of my final thoughts about this. I think Drift is one of the best songs in the soundtrack. I think Daisuke really outdid himself, right? And it's a song that's not necessarily super referential to other styles of music. It is, but not exclusively, right? It contains multitudes, as some might say, right? And I think that that's a really good way of representing Happy Chaos. A character that's like kind of mysterious, a character that has an omnipotent sort of situation, a character that's very existential, right? It makes a lot of sense to treat him as a bearer of all these different styles, like, you know, as representations of their personality. I also think that the fact that making all of the keys revolve around different D modes, right? Like D Dorian into D Mixolydian, into D Phrygian, into D Ionian, that's 4 different D modes in the same song. That's not something that you see a lot. So I think that's a very clever way of like representing that sort of idea of containing multitudes that Happy Chaos has. I love the transitions between the sections. I love how abrupt everything feels. Because of this cohesive narrative that exists within the song, and because of how starkly different all the sections are from each other, this does what Axel's theme tried to do. And because it gives you time, right? It develops each section quite a bit before moving on to the next one. Which is different from like Axel's theme, which again, okay, YouTube monsters, I know, I saw it in the comments, I know that Axel's theme is referring to his time travel. I am perfectly aware of that. I just don't think it's that good of a song. I think as a song, Drift, despite the fact that it's trying to be referential to the character, and doesn't lose its status as a good song by doing that. And I think that's a very valuable thing. It's a really hard thing to do, right? So props to Daisuke, and I guess to Happy Chaos for having this like wonderful song. I think Happy Chaos has been a great addition to the Guilty Gear Strive roster, despite the fact that I cannot play him. And hey, if you've made it so far to the end, thank you so much for watching. I know these videos are kind of long, but hopefully you get something out of the music analysis. We're going to keep this stuff going. Sorry it's been a while since I posted a video, but you know, here I am, ready to like do this stuff. Thank you so much, and peace out. I appreciate y'all being here. Bye-bye.